I was 12 years old when my mother dropped me off at her sister's house with a backpack and a "I'll talk to you later" note. It wasn't drama. It was abandonment. She said she needed some time to herself. At the time, I thought it was normal for a mother to need to breathe. Today, I know that she was just another woman who was too cowardly to raise the child she had with the wrong man. And that child was me. My aunt's name was Marta. She lived in a cramped flat with a musty smell and an unlocked bathroom. She said that the world was cruel to good women, that if it wasn't for her, I'd end up on the street. She repeated this often, like someone who expects eternal gratitude for offering a roof over her head and a thin mattress. She lived with a guy, Ezekiel, 30-something, thick voice, a look that pierced through. He didn't smile, he didn't joke, he didn't make a point of appearing polite. I found the way he looked at me strange. At the time, I didn't understand. Today, I understand too much. The first night, she made me some tea. She said it was to relax. I had a bit of insomnia, she said. That's the stuff of a restless boy. You need to slow down. I accepted. After all, she was my aunt. And when you're 12 and have an absent mother, any adult seems trustworthy. I drank. I woke up without remembering having slept, and not in the same place where I'd closed my eyes. I was in the living room, without a blanket, with my pants slightly open. The first sensation was confusion. The second, shame. But I couldn't say what. I walked slowly back to the bedroom, my body limp. She said I must have been sleepwalking. I laughed awkwardly. I believed her. At school, the absences started. Constant headaches, dizziness, vomiting out of nowhere. The principal called my aunt. She said it was anxiety, that she was taking care of it, that a boy raised by an unmarried woman develops some things, but that she could handle it. I kept drinking the tea. Every night. It said it was chamomile with honey, but it tasted sour. My tongue was numb. My eyes were heavy. And then there was just emptiness. I started waking up in strange positions. On the floor, on top of the blanket, not under it. Crooked clothes. Marks on my body that I didn't remember making. I wondered if it was me who hit myself in my sleep, if I kicked the wall, if I moved around too much. Because it was easier to believe in lack of control than in abuse. Ezekiel started staying at home all day. He said he was doing a bit of work, but it was a lie. He prowled around. He never came into my room during the day, but at night I heard footsteps, slow, cautious, and the doorknob, always the doorknob, turning slowly, testing. At 13, I learned to hold my tea in my mouth and spit it down the drain. I didn't sleep anymore, or pretended to. I was afraid to close my eyes, afraid of waking up and discovering that there was something worse than what I couldn't remember. I started writing in a notebook. Details, dates, feelings, nothing to report. Not at that moment. It was for me, because I felt that if I didn't put it on paper, it would disappear. It would erase me, as if what I was experiencing was so absurd that if I didn't write it down, it would become a fabrication. My mother didn't call. When she did, it was to ask if I was going to school, if I was obeying Aunt Marta. When I replied that it was strange living there, she changed the subject, as if a boy's discomfort was just a tantrum. One day, I tried to leave. I walked down the street with my backpack on. I was going to walk to the bus station. I didn't know where. I just wanted some distance. But she saw me through the gate. She made a fuss. She said I was ungrateful, that I was returning with contempt everything she did for me. She forced me inside. And that night, the tea came on stronger. I woke up naked from the waist down. That's when something broke. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the floor for over an hour. I didn't think about revenge. I didn't even think about running away. I just thought that my body was no longer mine, and maybe it never had been. I continued to live there for another 2 years, 12 to 14, a time that didn't pass. It rotted away. Today I'm 60, but if I close my eyes on that early morning, I'm the same kid with the baggy pants and the silence. And that's why now, after so long, I've decided to tell you. Because forgetting is not an option, and pretending that it's over isn't fair on that boy who nobody wanted to see. The hardest thing to accept wasn't what he did to me. It was what she allowed. Because his violence was dark, silent, like a bug on the prowl. But what she did was worse. She watched. She knew. She chose not to see. I chose to remain silent. It was as if my suffering served some purpose in their lives. Perhaps an agreement. Perhaps convenience. I never found out, but I felt it. And every day it weighed heavier. At 14, I began to see my face change. Puberty made me thin. My bones protruded from my skin, but my eyes, they hardened. I didn't smile anymore. I didn't joke. I just watched, like someone waiting for the right moment to run. But I didn't run. Not yet. I was just getting ready. Every step he took through the house was a rehearsal. Her every false word was a rehearsal. And I watched it all from inside myself, like someone who knows they're going to explode. But not today. Ezekiel lost any shame he pretended to have. He walked past me in his towel, sat too close, said things with double meanings, called me man of the house, with a crooked, disgusting smile, as if it were a dirty joke that only he understood. I didn't reply, and that seemed to irritate him. The more I kept quiet, the closer he got, as if my silence was an affront. But I knew that opening my mouth too soon was giving him ammunition. And I wanted proof, not just anger. I started hiding things, collecting tea after she left. I'd pour it into a disposable cup, write the date on it, and hide it in a cupboard that only I could touch. One day, I stole his cell phone. I saw the searches. How to sedate without leaving a trace. Tea to dope teenagers. Diazepam side effects for minors. I saved them on a USB stick hidden in the toolbox in the basement. I knew it wouldn't last long. Sooner or later he would realize, but I was willing to pay to see. My mother disappeared completely. No phone call, no letters, no symbolic dates, no lies. It was as if I had died. And, in a way, I did. The light version of me died. It stayed there, buried between doses of tea, while they laughed in the living room watching soap operas. The neighborhood saw little, but they weren't stupid. Donna Nede, next door, even asked if everything was all right. She said I was too quiet, that my face was deep, that I looked ill. I replied that it was just an allergy, that the doctor had already given me some medicine. She looked at me with pity, but she didn't insist. Older people recognize fear in other people's eyes, but don't always have the courage to face their own. It was early one morning in July that I decided to leave. Not to run away, to leave, with everything, with proof, with a name, with truth. I waited for them to go to sleep. I took my backpack with what little I had. I stole the teapots, the USB stick, the notebook with the records. I wrote a note, not out of affection, out of pride. You didn't kill it, but you didn't take care of it either. I'm not coming back. I walked to the bus stop, cold cutting into my skin, pocket pierced, but I was shivering more inside than out. I arrived at the police station with a dirty face and hands full of fear. I asked to speak to someone. They took their time. They asked me if I had done anything wrong. I said no. I said someone else had, and that I was there to tell them. I spent hours repeating the same story, with pause, with detail, with shame. Some believed me. Others looked as if I was exaggerating. A new agent, with a steady gaze, listened to me in my entirety, without interrupting. He picked up the jars and took them to the lab. He said he'd see what he could do, but right away, I could see there was something serious going on. They sent me to a shelter, a room with a bunk bed, cracked walls, a thin blanket, but without him, without her. The silence was different. It wasn't a threat. It was rest. I was offered a psychologist. I accepted, but I was mute for the first 3 sessions, not out of pride, out of tiredness. At the 4th session, I spoke. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just said, I want him to pay. But more than that, I want her to know that I know. The process was slow. Forensics confirmed substances in the teas. The USB stick was attached. His searches were analyzed. Marta was called to testify. She denied everything. She said she treated me like her son, that she never saw anything wrong, that the tea was his grandmother's recipe. that I was confused, influenced, that I could have been making it up. Her lawyer tried to paint me as a problem. She said I had a history of disobedience, that I was angry, but the judge listened to the audio, one I recorded in hiding when he came into the room and kept whispering my name. The recording was bad, but the tone was clear. The disgust was audible. He was arrested at the end of a gray Tuesday. Marta left the room in tears. I pretended it hurt, but it didn't. I wanted to ask her why she was crying, whether it was because of what she'd done or because of what they'd stopped hiding. I stayed in the shelter for a while longer. Each week was an attempt to feel in control of my life again, sleeping without fear, eating without rushing, opening the window without imagining that someone was going to call me in a low voice. It was strange, but it was freedom. At 15, I decided that no one was ever going to put fear into me without an answer. I didn't promise to take revenge. I promised to rebuild myself, but in my own way. No forced forgiveness, no embellished overcoming, because what they did to me can't be undone, but it is transformed, and I was willing to be living proof of that. I stayed in that shelter for almost 2 years. There were people who came and went quickly. Some returned home with the false promise of change. Others disappeared without saying anything. I didn't. I stayed, because nobody came to get me. And, deep down, I think I preferred it that way. I no longer trusted any adult who had my blood. I learned to live with the smell of paint peeling off the wall, with unsalted food, with the ready advice of social workers. I trusted almost no one, but I didn't reject everyone either. I chose, I tested, I observed, I started reading a lot. I took books from the school library and hid them under my pillow. I would read at night, borrowing a flashlight from one of the older kids. I'd sit in silence, immersed in stories that weren't mine. It was a way of breathing, to get out of there without leaving. Sometimes I'd try to write too, but I'd stop at the third line, because every word pulled a hole, and I didn't want to fall in anymore. Justice took its course. Ezekiel was sentenced. He got 7 years, not because he was sorry, but because he couldn't deny the obvious. Marta spent 2 years on probation. She never set foot in a cell. She didn't even pay a fine. She left court with a clean face, but I saw the weight in her eyes that no anklet could solve. After my conviction, they tried to transfer me to another home, with a new family. I refused. I didn't want a show of affection or a fresh start with plastic. I preferred what I already knew, even if it was bad. At least it was honest. At 17, I emancipated myself. I was allowed to live alone on the condition that I continued studying. I found a little room at the back of the workshop where I started working as a helper. I washed parts, cleaned grease, fetched tools. Nothing dignified, but at least no one touched me without permission. The owner of the workshop, Mr. Jorge, was quiet. He didn't ask anything. He paid me well, let me stay in my room, lent me tools when I wanted to tinker on my own. One day, he gave me a broken radio to try and fix. I managed to get it working in 3 days. He didn't say congratulations, he just left 3 more radios on the workbench. That's how I became the repair boy. And that somehow gave me an identity. I continued studying. At night, I slept a lot, and my notebook was dirty with oil. Nobody there knew about my past. Not the teachers, not my classmates. When people asked about my family, I said that I had lived alone since I was young. Some were impressed. Others thought I was lying. Better that way. I didn't talk about what happened. I didn't need to. The way I walked, my exaggerated care with doors, my refusal to sleep outside the house, all of that said more than any explanation. Anyone who paid attention understood. Those who weren't paying attention didn't need to know. When I turned 20, I started saving money. Not to travel, not to buy anything big. I just wanted to get away from that city. I wanted to live where my name wouldn't be associated with anything, where my past couldn't be remembered by a talkative neighbor or a clerk at the courthouse. I went far away, a small town on the coast. I got a job as a maintenance technician in a hotel. Tiny room, short salary, but a window overlooking the sea. That was the first real feeling of freedom. Washing my face in the morning and seeing the horizon instead of a dark corridor. It took me more than a decade to let anyone get close. The first attempts failed. Any more intimate insinuation, and I froze. It wasn't for lack of desire. It was for fear of losing control. My body remembered what my mind tried to forget, and that ended up driving away those who wanted to stay. It wasn't until I was 35 that I met someone who had patience. I'm not going to romanticize it. It wasn't a movie love story. It was a connection between wounded people. She also came from a broken past, and that brought us together. We didn't heal, but we respected each other, and that was enough. We lived together for 12 years. Then she wanted to go back to her hometown. I didn't want to go. We parted in peace. No drama, no hurt feelings. Like two survivors who understood that walking together has a time to end too. I never had children, and I don't think I ever really wanted to. I was afraid of repeating the cycle, of not knowing how to protect them, of not being able to love them as they deserved. I preferred to remain whole on my own, rather than share what I still lacked. Over time, I learned to organize my pain. I stored it in mental boxes, one for each phase, one for abandonment, another for silence, a third for the details I never told anyone, all locked up tight. And every now and then, I'd open one just to see if it still hurt. And it did, but less. Today, I'm 60. I live on a remote farm. I tend vegetable gardens, tinker with old radios, and give technical lessons to young apprentices in the region. Some people look at me as an example. They don't know that I'm rubble inside. But they don't need to know either. What I've experienced doesn't define me, but it explains me. I never sought revenge. I just wanted them to know that I remembered. And even though I remembered, I moved on. For many years, I avoided going back to that city, even when I needed to sort out some paperwork or when someone mentioned a distant relative who still lived there. I made excuses. It was as if my body knew that stepping on that sidewalk again would open doors that I had spent decades forcibly closing. But time, that ironic old man, always finds ways to pull you back. At 57, I received a letter. It didn't come from the post office, but from a young man who showed up at the farm gate asking for me. He said he was Marta's grandson. At that moment, my throat caught. My stomach felt like it was 12 again. I asked him to wait. I went to the kitchen and drank a glass of water without taking a breath. I came back. He handed over the envelope with an almost disconcerting respect. He said his grandmother wanted to see me, that she was ill, that he didn't have much time left. I kept the letter without opening it. I didn't read it that day, nor the following week. I left it on the dresser like someone trying to forget a warning. Curiosity was no greater than tiredness. Knowing what she wanted wasn't a priority. It never was. I only opened it after a month, on a sleepless night, while the rain was beating down hard on the roof. The words were handwritten, with shaky handwriting and short sentences. He said that he knew I didn't deserve anything, that he saw me grow up even when he pretended not to, that he regretted it, that he felt ashamed, and that, before he died, he wanted to ask for forgiveness by looking into my eyes. I closed the envelope. I stared at the wall for long minutes. I didn't cry, nor did I feel anger. I felt emptiness, because her request for forgiveness didn't change anything, and at the same time, it confirmed everything. She knew. She had always known. She just chose not to act. Not because she couldn't, but because she didn't want to. It took me a week to decide whether to go. In the end, I went. Not for her. For me, I wanted to see what was left. I wanted to look at that face without the weight of the boy I once was. I entered the city like someone invading an old dream. The streets seemed smaller. The houses were uglier. Time wears everything down, including memories. I arrived at the nursing home where she was staying. They said she didn't talk much. She spent the day in silence, looking out of the window. I entered the room with firm steps. She recognized me immediately. She tried to smile. Her mouth failed. Her eyes filled up. I stood still. I didn't sit down. I didn't touch her. She said my name, just once. Then she apologized. She repeated it 3 times. Her voice almost faded. She said she was afraid, that he preferred to hide behind cowardice because it was more comfortable than guilt. That silence was easier to manage than the truth. I listened without interrupting. When he'd finished, he looked at me like someone hoping for absolution. I told him I wasn't here for that I wasn't there to comfort anyone. I wasn't wishing harm, but I wasn't offering peace either, because peace isn't given, it's earned, and if she wanted to leave lighter, that was her problem. I carried my weight alone, and I overcame it. Let her take care of hers now. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't even cry anymore. She just nodded, like someone who recognizes a just sentence. I left the room without looking back. I crossed the corridor with a light body, and for the first time since I was a teenager, I felt like that chapter was over. A few months later, I learned of her death from a note left in the mailbox at the house. No official announcement, just a crumpled piece of paper with a date and time. No invitation to the wake, no mention of what we'd been through. And that was fine. It wasn't a bow. It was a cut, and cuts are not honored. It's forgotten. Ezekiel died in jail. I saw it in a newspaper footnote. He had been transferred to a prison in the countryside and suffered a heart attack. Nobody claimed the body for days. He was buried as an indigent. I stared at the news for a while. I thought about tearing it up, but I kept it. Not out of homage, but for symbolic justice. It was like stamping the final page of a book that had dragged on for too many chapters. I went back to the farm and got on with my life. The students at the workshop knew nothing about it. The neighbors treated me like a quiet old man who repairs radios and grows basil. Sometimes, in the afternoons, someone calls me for coffee. I politely decline, not out of dislike, but because chosen solitude is very different from imposed solitude. And that I have embraced. One afternoon, one of the boys I taught to assemble wiring brought in a broken stereo box. When I opened it, I saw that there was a notebook inside. He laughed. He said it was a present, that I should write something, that my head seemed to have a history. I didn't answer, but that night I opened the notebook, and I wrote my name on the first page. Nothing else. I stared at it for a few minutes. My name, Lucas. Simple. No surname. No past. Just the name. There, alone. At the top of the page, it looked like a beginning, because even at 60, some beginnings still make sense. I finished writing my name on that page and closed the notebook like someone guarding something sacred. It wasn't courage or inspiration. It was just the feeling that this story needed to exist outside of me. For the first time in decades, I accepted that what I'd experienced wasn't a hidden shame, but proof that I'd carried on, even after everything. I've never been one to talk much less remember. I've always preferred to keep my memories in order, locked up tight, like old boxes in a basement that nobody touches. But getting older forces you to look at what you've accumulated. I started writing little by little, nothing linear, fragments. One day I wrote down the smell of the room in that house. Another, the sound of the doorknob turning slowly. Sometimes, just a loose sentence that came out of nowhere while I was watering the plants or fiddling with an old appliance. And the next thing I knew, there was almost a book in there. Not to publish, not to expose, but to leave it, because time goes by, the body fails. And memory sometimes lies. Paper doesn't. I received an invitation from a school to give a talk. Someone found out that I had been a technician for years, teaching rural kids how to fix old things, and decided that I could tell them about my career. I thought about refusing. I felt like disappearing into the woods for a week, but I accepted. I went with the simplest clothes I had, a clean button-down shirt, dark pants, and dull shoes. I arrived and saw those young eyes staring at me curiously, people who had never been slapped in life, but had never really been listened to. I said very little. I told them about the workshop, the farm, the radios, the vegetable garden. And at the end, a girl asked me what had made me choose this life so far away. I took a deep breath. I just said that when you grow up in the middle of the wrong kind of noise, you learn to love silence. They understood, some more than others. The girl smiled with a respect I never asked for, and that was enough. I didn't get married, nor do I regret it. I had opportunities, but I chose not to repeat cycles that I didn't really know. For me, love has always been a dangerous thing. I learned to protect myself before I learned to give myself away. And that shapes us. It doesn't mean I was never loved. It just means that I didn't want to get stuck where I could lose myself. I never spoke to my mother again. She died years ago, alone, in a corner of a suburb. An acquaintance told me. She said she left me few things and no letter. No mention of the son she abandoned. I didn't cry. I didn't miss her. I didn't want to take anything back. Because there are losses that happen before death. And that's how it was with her. Sometimes I dream about that room. Not about what happened there, but about the feeling of being trapped, of not being able to get out of bed, even though my whole body is begging for escape. I wake up sweating, but I don't scream. I just get up, open the window, take a deep breath, and remember that I'm not there anymore. Reality has become shelter. And that, for me, is a victory. There are days when I look in the mirror and hardly recognize who I see. The white beard, the deep-set eyes, the tired skin. But what surprises me most is not the time that has passed. It's the fact that I'm still here, whole, without having allowed myself to rot from the inside. Many people in my situation have become numbers. They screwed up. They disappeared. I didn't. I held on tight. It hurt, but I stayed. The other day, Marta's grandson showed up again. He brought an envelope with some of her papers. Old documents, photographs, things left over after the house was sold. He wanted to give them back to me. I thanked him, but refused. She said that what belongs to me is in the past, and what's left can be buried with her. The boy nodded, embarrassed. He said he understood. And, honestly, I thought he really did. I finished the notebook. I kept it in a wooden box, along with a spare key and a letter. I wrote to the next owner of the house, in case one day someone wanted to know who I was. Not out of vanity, but so that they don't forget that men also carry scars that no one can see. That silence is often a form of protection, not cowardice, and that the world still needs to learn to listen to quiet boys. If anyone reads this story in the future, I want them to know I didn't win in the beautiful sense of the word. I didn't have a happy ending. I didn't put everything right, but I survived with dignity. And sometimes that's harder than anything else. If you've made it this far, leave a like. It doesn't change my story, but it shows that it wasn't told in vain, so I'm very happy with your like and your comment.